Welcome to WikiPodcast. You look around and the world is just bursting with color, isn't it? Vibrant greens, dazzling blues, fiery reds. It feels so fundamental, like color is just, well, an intrinsic part of everything we see. But what if color isn't just out there? What if it's something much more complex involving the physics of light interacting with our biology?
That's really the core question driving this deep dive today. We've gathered some really fascinating material to unpack how we perceive the visual spectrum. We're going to explore the journey of light, a form of electromagnetic wave, as we've discussed in this physics series, from the source to a surface, and how our eyes capture it, and crucially, how our brain translates all of that into the rich, vivid experience you call color. The big takeaway right from the start is that color isn't some fixed property of an object. It's a visual perception, a result of physics, biology, and neuroscience all working together.
Okay, let's unpack this. So it's not just about the light hitting the object, it's about the interaction and then what we do with that information.
Absolutely. What seems like a simple, straightforward fact, that apple is red, is actually the endpoint of a really complex process. And there are some surprising steps along the way that reveal just how much of color is actually created by you, the observer.
All right, let's start at the very beginning of that process then, the light itself. When we talk about color, we're talking about visible light. There's just a tiny sliver of the vast electromagnetic spectrum, right?
Precisely. Visible light is a specific range of electromagnetic radiation, characterized by its wavelength and its intensity. For us humans, this slice typically falls between roughly 390 and 700 nanometers. Think of it like different notes in a huge cosmic orchestra. Visible light is just the few octaves we can actually see.
And most light sources, they don't just play one note, do they? They play a whole chord, a mix of wavelengths.
That's right. The sun, an incandescent bulb, they emit light across many wavelengths, creating a specific spectral distribution, or, a spectrum. Your sensation of color depends on the combination of wavelengths that reaches your eye. But here's where it gets really interesting. Different spectral combinations, completely different chords of light, can produce the exact same color sensation for you.
Whoa, really? So two lights could have completely different physical makeups in terms of wavelengths, but look identical in color.
Yes, exactly. Those are called metamers. Your visual system simplifies the incoming light. It treats physically distinct stimuli as perceptually identical under certain conditions. It's a key clue that color isn't just a direct readout of the light's physics.
That's fascinating. So those pure colors we think of from a rainbow,
Yeah.
like ROYGBY, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, are those pure spectral colors, single wavelengths.
They are, yes. Like Newton observed when he dispersed white light, you see this continuous spectrum. However, how we divide that continuous spectrum into distinct color names? Well, that isn't purely physics. It's heavily influenced by culture and language.
Oh, yeah.
The boundaries, even which colors we consider basic, can vary quite a bit.
So the labels are a bit more flexible than the physics.
Exactly. The physics gives us the spectrum, but our language and culture shape how we categorize it. And the intensity of the light also dramatically impacts the perceived color. A low-intensity orange-yellow might look brown, for instance, and a low-intensity yellow-green can look olive-green. There's even a phenomenon called the Bazalt-Brook shift, where just increasing the light intensity can actually subtly change the perceived hue itself.
Okay, so light with a specific spectrum hits an object. How does the object transform that light to give it its perceived color then?
Right, this is where the object's physical properties come into play. An object's color is primarily determined by how its surface interacts with the light hitting it. Specifically, which wavelengths it absorbs and which it scatters or reflects back towards your eye.
Like a red shirt absorbs most wavelengths but bounces back the red ones. Is that the basic idea?
Precisely. Transparent objects, like clear glass, they let most light pass straight through, so they appear colorless or maybe take on the color of the light passing through them. Opaque objects either absorb or reflect the light. And translucent objects, like frosted glass, they allow some light through but also scatter some internally. And what gets absorbed often just gets converted into heat.
Makes sense. But there's also that really cool category that doesn't rely on pigments at all, structural color.
Ah, yes. This is a great example of color being a result of physics at a microscopic level. Structural color isn't due to chemical pigments absorbing light. Instead, it arises from light interacting with tiny, repeating microstructures on the surface or within the object. We're talking structures on the same scale as the wavelengths of light itself. These structures cause light waves to interfere with each other in specific ways, selectively reinforcing some wavelengths and canceling out others depending on the viewing angle.
Like peacock feathers. Or the shimmer on a butterfly wing.
Exactly. Also, soap bubbles, opals, even the blue in many human irises. The colors shift as you move because the geometry changes the interference pattern. And the blue of the sky is another classic example that's Rayleigh scattering. Air molecules are much smaller than light wavelengths, and they preferentially scatter the shorter blue and violet wavelengths in all directions across the sky.
Ah,
Longer wavelengths, like reds and oranges, pass through more directly, which is why sunsets look red or orange when the light travels a longer path through the atmosphere. The blues have been scattered away by then.
so structural color is literally the structure itself messing with the light waves.
It's the structure causing wave interference, yes.
Yeah.
Creating color without any pigment involved. It's pure physics generating that visual effect.
All right, so the light leaves the source, interacts with the object through absorption, scattering, or these structural tricks, and that modified light hits our eyes. What happens then?
Okay, now the biological process kicks in. In your retina, you have specialized photoreceptor cells. Now you have rods, which handle dim light vision and are essentially colorblind, but then you have cones. Cones are responsible for color vision in brighter light. And humans are generally trichromatic, meaning we have three main types of cones.
3 types, right. What are they sensitive to?
We classify them by the range of wavelengths they're most sensitive to. S cones for short wavelengths peak around 450 nanometers, perceived generally as blue or blue-violet. Then M cones for middle wavelengths peaking around 540 millimeters, perceived as green. And L cones for longer wavelengths peaking around 570 millimeters. Now, it's crucial to note that L cones are often misleadingly called red cones.
Oh, why is that misleading?
Well, their peak sensitivity is actually in the greenish-yellow part of the spectrum, not deep red.
Okay, so they're not specifically sensing red or green then, but just responding to broad ranges of wavelengths.
That's the absolute key principle here, univariance. Each cone type responds to light across its sensitive range, sure, but it only sends a single signal to the brain, basically, how much light it's received in total. It cannot tell the difference between, say, a strong signal from one wavelength at its peak sensitivity and a weaker signal from multiple wavelengths across its range that just happen to add up to the same total stimulation.
Ah, okay, this must be why monomers work. Different physical combinations of wavelengths can produce the exact same total stimulation in those SM and L cones.
Precisely. Your eye effectively collapses the complex spectrum of incoming light down into just three numbers, three signals. We call them the tristimulus values. This simplification is fundamental. And based on just these three signals, a typical human can distinguish an estimated, well, around 10 million different colors.
10 million colors from just 3 inputs. That's incredible efficiency. So the eye is doing some serious data compression before it even gets to the brain.
Exactly. It's taking this complex, continuous signal from the world and reducing it down to 3 points of data to send onward for processing.
Okay, so the eye sends these 3 signals, these tristimulus values, but our experience of color feels so much richer than just 3 numbers. Where does the brain take over?
Right. This is where the magic of perception truly happens. The brain doesn't just passively receive the raw SML signals. The dominant theory, the opponent process theory, suggests the brain reorganizes this information into opponent channels. Think of it as pairs, a red versus green channel, a blue versus yellow channel, and also a black versus white channel that deals with lightness or luminance.
And that explains why we can't imagine or see something like reddish-green or yellowish-blue, because they're opponents in the same channel.
It does, exactly. Those opponent colors inhibit each other within these channels, so you can't perceive them simultaneously in the same place. The signals go from the eye to a part of the brain called the lateral geniculate nucleus, the LGN, where some of this initial opponent processing starts. Then they travel onto the visual cortex, passing through areas like V1 and V2, and crucially to the extended V4 area, which is particularly important for color processing. It seems to be in V4, in structure sometimes called globs, where these opponent signals are further processed and integrated to give us our full, conscious experience of hue.
So the eye provides the raw data, the 3 signals, but the brain takes that data and actively constructs the color we actually see using these opponent systems in specialized areas.
That's the critical insight, yes. Color isn't just hitting your eye, it's being actively built, interpreted, constructed by your brain. Which, leads back to that really profound question. Is color a property of the world, or is it really a property of our perception of the world?
And this complex system isn't always exactly the same for everyone, is it? What about non-standard ways we perceive color?
Right. The most common variation is color vision deficiency, often just called color blindness. It essentially means the range or gamut of colors someone can distinguish is reduced. It varies a lot in severity, from mild difficulties telling colors apart, which is called anomalous trichromacy, to missing an entire dimension of color vision, known as dichromacy, or in very rare cases, seeing no color at all, which is monochromacy.
And most often that's a genetic thing, an issue with the cones themselves.
Yes, usually it's the cone cells or the light-sensitive pigments within them that aren't quite right, typically inherited. There's also something called cerebral achromatopsia, which is very rare and caused by brain damage affecting color processing areas, not an issue with the eyes.
Okay. And the most familiar type is red-green colorblindness.
Yes, that's by far the most common, affecting significantly more males than females due to genetics. For someone with a strong form of this, like dichromacy, pairs of colors that look very distinct to a typical trichromat, like maybe blue and purple, or green and yellow, or even teal and gray, might appear confusingly similar or even identical. They're metamers for them. They effectively lack that red-green opponent channel we talked about.
So they see fewer distinct colors? What about the other way around, seeing more colors? Is tetrachromacy having 4 cone types real in humans?
Well, having 4 functional cone types is actually quite common in many animals, birds, fish, reptiles. It allows them to see distinctions in color that humans simply can't. In humans, well, it's complicated. While genetics suggests some women might possess the basis for a 4th distinct cone type pigment in their retina, actually being functionally tetrachromatic, meaning they can demonstrably see color distinctions that no one else can, seems to be extremely rare. There's really only one well-documented case in the scientific literature so far. But hypothetically, a functional tetrachromat might perceive vastly more colors, maybe hundreds of millions compared to the typical 10 million.
Hundreds of millions. Wow. It's hard to even wrap your head around that. Are there other brain-related color quirks?
Briefly, synesthesia is a fascinating one. That's where sensory input like hearing sounds or seeing letters automatically triggers a perception of color. It seems to involve some kind of cross-activation between different sensory areas in the brain, including color processing regions. Even historically, thinkers like Pythagoras were noted for forms of synesthesia, sometimes linking mathematical ratios to specific colors.
Right. And something more common that kind of tricks our perception after images, when you stare at a color.
Ah, yes, after images. They're a direct result of photoreceptor fatigue and adaptation within those opponent channels we discussed. If you stare intensely at a strong color, say bright green, the M cones and the green side of the red-green channel get temporarily tired or desensitized. Then, when you look away at a neutral surface, like white or gray, those fatigue pathways signal less strongly than usual. This creates a temporary imbalance, making you see the complementary color, in this case, the opponent color, red. Stare at red, see green, stare at blue, see yellow, and so on. It's your visual system recalibrating.
And color constancy. That's the brain actively trying to stabilize color perception, isn't it? Despite changing light.
Exactly. And it's quite remarkable when you think about it. Your brain works hard to help you perceive an object's color as relatively stable. Even though the lighting conditions the color temperature of the light source, its intensity might change dramatically, and that changes the actual spectrum of light hitting your eye from that object. Your brain achieves this partly by comparing colors across the entire scene. It sort of assesses the overall illumination and then adjusts its interpretation of the individual color signals coming from any one object.
So it's not just reading the color of a single point in isolation, it's figuring out the context, the lighting.
Precisely. It's comparing how light reflects off different surfaces in the scene to make an educated guess about the properties of the light source itself, and therefore the object's actual reflective properties, its true color. People like Edwin Land explored this with his retinics theory. It really highlights that the trichromatic signal from the eye is just the starting point, the input. The brain is performing complex computations to deliver a stable, useful color experience.
Okay, given all this complexity, physics of light, the biology of the eye, the brain's heavy-duty interpretation accurately reproducing color, like on a screen or in print, must be incredibly tricky.
Oh, it's a whole field of science and engineering. Color reproduction systems, whether it's the RGB pixels on your screen or the CMYK inks in your printer, they fundamentally rely on creating metamers. They don't usually replicate the exact spectral signature of the original color. Instead, they generate a specific mix of their primary colors that stimulates your 3 cone types in the same way the target color would. So it looks the same to you, even though the underlying physics, the spectrum, is totally different.
So my screen mixes red, green, and blue light in just the right amounts to trick my cones into seeing, say, yellow, even though it's not the same pure yellow wavelengths from a rainbow.
That's exactly the idea behind additive mixing, using light primaries like red, green, and blue. Mix red and green light, you perceive yellow. Mix all three, you perceive white. Printing, on the other hand, typically uses subtractive mixing with pigments or dyes, usually cyan, magenta, yellow, plus K for black, CMYK. Pigments work by absorbing wavelengths. Yellow pigment absorbs blue light, magenta absorbs green, cyan absorbs red. So if you mix yellow and magenta pigments, they absorb both blue and green light, leaving only red light to be reflected back to your eye. Mix all three primary pigments, and ideally, they absorb almost all light, resulting in black.
But these systems can't reproduce all the colors we can see, can they? There are limits.
Correct. The range of colors any given system can reproduce is called its gamut, and it's always limited. You simply can't perfectly match every single color the human eye can potentially perceive using only 3 or 4 fixed primaries. If you imagine plotting all visible colors on a diagram, the gamut of an RGB or CMYK system forms a triangle or polygon within that space. Colors outside that shape can't be accurately reproduced. Spectral colors, for instance, those pure single wavelengths from the rainbow, are generally outside the gamut of typical display or print systems. You can create a metamer that looks like a spectral color, maybe very vibrant, but it's not the same physical light.
Okay, let's get really theoretical for a moment, maybe a bit abstract. Our sources mention something called optimal colors. What on earth are those?
Ah, yes. This is a fascinating concept that comes directly from the physics of surface reflection. Optimal colors represent the theoretical absolute limit of how vibrant, how chromatic a surface color could possibly be. It's based on imagining a hypothetical material that has a perfect reflectance spectrum, meaning it reflects 100% of light within a specific wavelength range, or maybe 2 ranges, and absolutely 0% of light outside that range, with perfectly sharp, instantaneous transitions between the 0% and 100% reflectance levels.
Like a perfect ideal light filter, but for reflection off a surface.
Essentially, yes. Think of it as the most efficient possible way a surface could reflect light to produce the sensation of color. With real-world pigments, you always get more gradual, sloped transitions in reflectance across the spectrum, which tends to muddy the color slightly and limit its maximum vibrancy. Optimal colors define the absolute outer boundary, the skin of the theoretical color solid, the 3D space containing all possible surface colors. This theoretical shape is sometimes called the Rush-McAdam color solid, and this theoretical solid has distinct, sharp edges and points which correspond to these mathematically defined optimal colors.
Okay, that's pretty abstract. And there was a surprising point related to this. Something about pure spectral colors corresponding to black in this model. That sounds completely wrong.
It is really counterintuitive because perceptually, spectral colors are the definition of pure, vibrant hue. But within the specific mathematical framework of this theoretical color solid, which typically plots colors based on their lightness relative to a perfect white reflector and their chromaticness, a pure spectral color, by definition, only reflects light at a single infinitesimally narrow wavelength. Compared to a perfect white surface reflecting 100% across the entire visible spectrum, reflecting light at only one tiny point contributes virtually 0 overall light energy. So in this theoretical space, it maps to a point with 0 lightness and therefore 0 chroma, essentially black, even though it has maximum spectral purity.
Wow.
It really highlights how our perception of vibrancy or chroma isn't just about spectral purity alone, especially when you factor in how much light energy, lightness, is involved. The most chromatic surface colors we could theoretically perceive, sometimes called semichromes, are actually types of optimal colors that reflect a whole band of wavelengths at 100%, not just a single one. It's a complex idea showing how abstract color description gets when you really dig into the physics.
We've definitely covered a lot. The physics, the eye's biology, the brain's processing. It's clear color isn't just one simple thing. And we should probably briefly mention that culture and our wider cognition play a role too, right?
Absolutely, that's an important layer. Our experience of color isn't solely determined by the light hitting our eyes and the basic brain processing we've discussed. For example, how we name and categorize colors actually varies quite a bit across different languages and cultures. And there's evidence this can subtly influence how we perceive and even remember colors. Researchers have found interesting patterns in how basic color terms tend to appear in languages over time.
And there are those links people talk about between specific colors and cognitive effects or emotion.
Yes, that's the domain of color psychology, which studies these connections. While some claims might be overstated, there is research suggesting links. For instance, some studies link exposure to the color red to decreased cognitive performance in certain competitive settings for males, possibly due to associations with warning or dominance. Or the common observation and marketing practice linking the combination of red and yellow to increased appetite. Color also seems to impact memory-colored images or stimuli are often recalled better than black and white ones. It just reinforces the idea that color is a really rich, multimodal experience. It involves the physics, the biology, our perception, and these higher-level cultural and cognitive factors.
So looking back at our deep dive today, we've really journeyed from the basics of light waves bouncing off objects through the eye's clever three-cone system into the brain's complex opponent processing, touching on cool stuff like structural color, color deficiency, and even these mind-bending theoretical limits like optimal colors.
It truly reveals that color isn't some simple inherent property just sitting out there in the world, waiting to be passively observed. It's a dynamic construction. It's a complex output emerging from the intricate interplay between external physics, our specific biological hardware, and the remarkable interpretive power of our brain. What appears so effortless is actually an incredible symphony of processes.
So the next time you look at something colorful, maybe pause and consider that you're not just seeing light reflecting off a surface, but you're actively experiencing a complex symphony of physics, biology, and brain activity, all coming together to create that unique sensation just for you. Thanks for listening. Write us your opinion in the comments on how you think knowing the physics of color changes how you appreciate the art and beauty of the visual world. Subscribe to the channel to help more listeners reach our episodes. Thank you, and have an amazing day.